Okay, so yeah, we're now about 3 months removed from Starro version 3.4, which was a pretty big patch. So yeah, I got the Fate banner, the release of Finon, Triby's V-Run, Firefly's outfit, which had mixed reactions. But yeah, there was also the new story update that, kind of was the entire climax of Amphorius with everything that had been built up with Finon's story and the main story of Amphorius and everything. But uh, yeah, I wanted to kind of talk about something else with this video. So yeah, instead I'm wanting to highlight something that was kind of just as impactful, meaningful for the game's future, but kind of largely overshadowed by the sheer amount of stuff, that we had in 3.4. And no, I'm not referring to Origami Bird Clash's return. No, instead we're talking about Novaflare, the character enhancement system, which was also released in version 3.4. Uh, this was the first time that Hoyoverse has ever buffed any of the Star Rail characters. If you want to refer to them as buffs, I'll be referring to them as reworks and stuff. Um, but this wasn't the first time Hoyoverse has done this. They actually did this back in 2020 with Zhongli getting some damage buffs and everything back in the day due to his release being a little controversial. Um, but yeah, reworking character kits in any game can be controversial, but in a gacha game where players often spend real money to obtain those characters, it becomes a bit more polarizing. Uh, Other gacha titles usually handle outdated characters through a few different methods, like releasing new farmable equipment or new characters or weapons that synergize with older units, or even sometimes just directly buffing them, which happened with Zhongli, but is kind of a rarer option. The core business model of gacha games lives and breathes on incentivizing players to pull the newer characters, which, yeah, you can't really do that if you're just buffing characters all the time. Like, uh, with Jingliu, he kind of got some buffs, although even now he's still a little bit dated compared to some of the other characters. But yeah, uh, for a long time back, even before Amphoria started, he had received a bunch of indirect buffs and everything. But yeah, just because gacha games really like making money and having people gamble and everything, it's kind of hard to uh, directly buff characters, your older characters, and also still have newer characters that people are going to want to pull for. So it's not the most common option either. But yeah, one of the easiest ways to make people pull for newer characters is to make the newer content more difficult for the older characters. Uh, this phenomenon is kind of referred to as power creep, and something HSR is not a stranger to at this point. Um, I've wanted to make a video on my thoughts on power creep for a long time, but honestly, never really found the right words to frame it. And honestly, so many community discussions are already so saturated with talks about power creep and HP inflation. I haven't felt like I could add much to the conversation myself. Uh, but what makes the Nova Flare so interesting is that rather than just letting power creep pile up, Horrorverse kind of approached it a little bit differently, adjusting some of the characters that had already been released and everything. I think that the way that they approach these reworks is worth talking about because they didn't just apply like a single uniform strategy. Instead, each change felt like its own experiment in how to handle outdated or flawed kits. But one last detail worth noting is that um, with all of these adjustments, none of the character's signature light cones got changed at all. Um, I do think that that's an important decision that was made because it says a bit about how Warriors kind of wanted to balance the actual changes and gameplay improvements with the monetization side of things because a lot of these characters have light cones that you can pull for that are their signatures, but they also have newer characters like cones like Midays or Cypher's light cone that greatly outperform their signatures. Although Silverwolf's signature wasn't really that notable on her release either, but kind of a discussion for another time. So yeah, with that groundwork laid, we're going to take a closer look at all of these reworks, what they did right, what they left unsolved, might mean for the future of Star Realm reworks and stuff. Oh, and yeah, I did want to mention that I'm not going to be including the Eidolons in the discussion, but I will say that I think that they were positive and mostly just kind of were designed to facilitate the reworked kits a bit better than they would have if they weren't changed. But yeah, I have them on screen now if you want to go through and read them yourself. But I won't really discuss them because I don't think a lot of people really mess with a lot of the characters' eidolons and everything all the time. I'm kind of just analyzing this more from a casual player's perspective and everything. And I myself, even for the characters I have that were reworked, don't have any eidolons for them. But yeah, let's start with Silverwolf. So on the left, I'll have the simplified version of the buffs, and then on the right, you can read the actual text of all of the changes. But if you just want a simpler version, it's on the left. But yeah, Silverwolf is the clearest example of a straight buff. Skill no longer implements weaknesses at random, and now prioritizes the first ally in your lineup, and also lowers the enemy resistance to that element, making it much more consistent. Her ultimate was upgraded from single target to full AoE, hitting all enemies and reducing their defense at the same time. Talent was refined, so implanted weaknesses transferred to surviving enemies, prioritizing stronger ones, which keeps the debuffs uptime a bit better. And on top of that, she now has some extra energy generation and gets a little bit more damage with some of her talents and everything. Or, sorry, Ascension traces. But for Blade's adjustments were kind of more about refining his kit. Blade was already an HP scaling character in a lot of ways, and this rework kind of just reinforced that idea a lot better and everything. So he got improved synergy with more modern HP focused supports. Skill puts him into a high risk state, boosts his damage, and enhances his basic attack. His ultimate converts lost HP into a massive damage burst. His talent ties it all together by rewarding him for taking damage rather than sacrificing HP, building stacks until he unleashes a really strong follow-up attack. Although, really strong kind of in air quotes. As his damage is still pretty good, but not exactly a top tier character or anything, even after the rework. He is stronger and more consistent than before. I do think that his changes to, or like the way that he was changed to not be a top tier character or anything after this rework was mostly because he was added to the character event warp optimization, which is whenever you lose 50/50s, you get one of the standard characters, and then you can also add Sela, Blade, and Fushuan into that list, and you were, yeah, that was just like another way of being able to obtain them and everything. I actually ended up pulling Sela the day that released on stream and everything, and it was kind of funny because I was talking about how the changes were implemented, and I made the changes to my account and then proceeded to lose 50/50 on the banners to Sela. For Kafka, this one is a fairly controversial rework, although yeah, I'll kind of talk about some of my thoughts on it and everything. So Kafka's rework is more of an identity shift than a straight buff. She's no longer a co-DPS, stacking her own dots, which, I mean, she still is stacking dots, but instead she kind of plays more like a sub-DPS support. Her skill and ultimate still activate existing dots. Her follow-up attack also now triggers existing dots as well. And then her follow-up attack is from her talent, which has 2 charges now, and will refresh whenever she uses her ultimate or whenever she gains a turn, like normal. On top of that now, one of her Ascension traces gives allies with 75% effect hit rate a really big attack boost. So she has stronger synergy with the actual carries and dot teams of Hysolence and Black Swan, as they both focused on stacking EHR and attack percent as well. But yeah, these changes kind of narrowed her role, but made her more defined. She's a dot enabler, first and foremost, which did change the relic set that she needs to farm. And it also changed the light cone that she likes to use. Her new best light cone is a free-to-play option that outperforms her old signature, unless you have her 4th Eidolon, in which case it's comparable. But yeah, her kit is different now. It is stronger in some ways, but a lot of Kafka's strength nowadays comes from Hycelin's release more so than just the buff, although the buff, or I mean, not really buff at rework, although the rework is still an overall positive change for her kit. It did kind of change the way that she played a lot. For Jingliu, she got quite a lot of changes as well. She went from being a pure attack scaling DPS to an HP scaling DPS, kind of like Casterus or Blade. So yeah, her relic set changed once again. This isn't the first time this even happened with Jingliu. Her enhanced state got an extra charge, can now be refreshed when allies lose HP, whether enemy attacks or their own skills. This gave her a really good synergy with Hyacin, especially if you had Hyacin's signature, which let Jingliu stay in her enhanced state permanently. While this is a buff, and her damage did increase a lot with all of the HP scaling and everything, it does come with a lot more investment requirements than a lot of the other characters for comparing her old kit to her new kit. Luckily, all of these changes, I did forget to mention that all these changes are toggleable for all characters, but I do think was a nice choice just to give players the option, although all of the reworks have resulted in the characters being stronger, so they are recommended to change to, but the option is still there for people that want to use the older kits. Her signature light cone is still usable on her, although Mighty's is an upgrade, but it's comparable to his signature in some ways. I think it's like a 14% damage increase or something like that, which her own signature is like a 20-ish% damage increase over her like free-to-play options or whatever, just because free-to-play options for destruction characters aren't that bad. But yeah, she's still more powerful, but you do have to do a little bit of grinding to directly transition to the newer kit. But yeah, I did want to mention again that Hoyoverse did leave out changing any of the signature light cones with all of these changes. You could argue that that's to avoid upsetting players who invested in them, but it's most likely just because all of them work fine enough even after the changes. Blade and Jingliu still function as intended, as really good options for them. Kafka's signature was kind of indirectly invalidated, which is a bit upsetting if you're kind of like me and have less than E4 Kafka and your signature, so now your Kafka signature is a little useless if you're wanting to play dot teams a bit more optimally with the new playstyle and everything. And then Silverwolf signature is also still really bad. It was really bad on release, and it did not get any better with them not changing it. Better to use ciphers or before the tutorial mission starts, or you can also use forgetting the name of the, I should have written it down, but you can use the one that had Blue Cup on it for the Nihility light cone. That's a 4-star one. That one's also really good with Silverwolf. But yeah, I do think that this decision says a lot about priorities, just because I feel like a lot of players get characters at E0, S0 more so than getting them at E0, S1. Even though a lot of these characters that they did reworks on were fan favorite characters, so I feel like a lot of people would have gotten their signatures, and they were also really early, being 1.x characters, so some people would start the game and just have a bunch of pulls from starting the game late and then pulling a character in their light cone, or they would have started the game at 1.0 and saved them for some of the early characters because everyone but Jingliu was known at launch, and then Jingliu was known about a little bit after launch. So there was a lot of time to get to know these characters, and people could have saved up for them and everything there. But yeah, I do think that not changing the light cone was kind of a safe move, but I do think that it would have been really interesting had they gone through with and changed light cones. And I do think that Kafka's and Silver especially could have benefited a lot from having any changes. But yeah, so where did these characters actually land after their reworks? Did they generally improve? I don't think that that's kind of the easiest question to answer, but if you wanted to say yes or no, then yes, each character does perform better than the base version when slotted into similar teams. For Blade and Jingliu, the changes made them at least viable picks in current in-game content when the enemy matchups favor them. In fact, like with the latest MOC that just came out this Sunday, I was able to use my Jingliu perfectly fine. That I used Kafka on the first side, and she worked good there as well. Although that is kind of just due to the fact that the current MOC does have a little bit of dot favoritism, with Heisland being a newly released character and everything. So it's kind of hard to exactly place where Kafka will be, just because Kafka's also kind of held back by the fact that you have Black Swan as your other teammate if you don't have Heisland. So you kind of need more dot characters to exist to really see what this would do, but I mean, at the same time, there weren't that many dot characters before, and Kafka was underperforming, and now she's also in the sub-DPS category instead of the DPS category, which was not included in the 3.0 MOC list, but that's because she was a DPS then, and now she's more of a, like, sub DPS buffer and everything. Silverwolf shifted from being borderline unviable at times to being a solid option. Like, the reason that Silverwolf was so highly rated in 3.0 MOC is because you could use her with Acheron, but if you didn't have Acheron and you had Silverwolf, there was almost no really good teams for her. I do remember using her with Jingliu, actually, who wasn't even doing that much better. But for specifically single target focused MOCs, like with Aventurine boss, I remember using Silverwolf plus Jingliu to be able to clear that before their reworks. And yeah, they had kind of decent synergy. Silverwolf also had like kind of decent synergy with pretty much any single target focused DPS, so like Sela, the classic Quantum team, and everything. But yeah, Kafka's placement is just kind of weird, just with all of the dot filling, and then if there's not dot filling, then you just have a kind of bad lack of dot teammates to really compare to Heisland, who is a new character, so kind of hard to evaluate just how much of the rework impacted her, but I do think that it does make her a bit more future-proof, which is a nice way to change her character, as she is one of the most popular characters in the game, so I imagine that people are happy that she is able to be used with like future characters a bit more easier than before. But yeah, I also thought that it was kind of worth comparing the way that Hoyoverse handled the buffs in Sorrow compared to how they did, or reworks in Sorrow compared to how they did it in ZZZ, because they actually reworked Ellen Joe in ZZZ in version 2.0 around the same time as the Starro reworks came out. With Ellen, they reworked her after player feedback about her kit being outdated. She was the first limited character of the game, and her base kit was admittedly clunky compared to later units, but her performance was honestly still fine. The bigger issue with her was kind of relevance. as if you had Ellen, but you also pulled Miyabi with a Void Hunter, which is a character that you're going to want to, or like the Void Hunters are characters that you're going to want to pull in ZZZ from a general recommendation perspective, just because they're designed to kind of be a bit more future-proof. They also get a kind of unique element with Miyabi getting Frost, which is kind of an alternate version of the ice element that Ellen had. So, yeah, Miyabi was just kind of like a stronger Frost or ice unit than Ellen, so there was almost no reason to use Ellen if you had Miyabi, was kind of the main issue with her. But yeah, in 1.4, Reworks added Lost Void, which temporarily gave characters like Ellen reworked kits. These versions did smooth out her gameplay and make her feel more fluid compared to her base kit. With 2.0, they kind of brought the Lost Void rework into her normal gameplay. Her W engine was not affected, like with the character's signature light cones in Star Realm, but I do think that the W engine for Ellen is really good and works for their kit nicely, so I don't think that there was kind of a need for any change to it, to be honest. But yeah, I also don't really think that the Ellen buff was entirely warranted, as Ellen's performance before the buff versus after the buff was about the same. If anything, Ellen rose in the tier list by certain other characters falling down in the tier list. But there have been some characters that have come out after this rework, like Jufufu, that work really well with Ellen. Also, Seed is another character that you can use with Ellen that just came out fairly recently. So she has had some retroactive buffs as well. You have like Lighter, although Lighter released before a rework. But yeah, I think whenever you compare Star Rail's approach with Zenless, there is kind of like an interesting idea where both were pretty big reworks, although I do think that Star Rails were far more experimental for at least Kafka and Jingliu. ZZZ kind of took more of a traditional approach and was a direct buff, although I don't really know if the buff was necessarily as warranted compared to a character like Haramasa, who wasn't that great on release, although does kind of require you to be able to play well to get full value out of him compared to most of the other ZZZ characters. And he still is about the same, although I could see them not buffing him because he was given for free, so not really incentivized to buff him, as it's not really likely that that people would be pulling for more copies of him unless they liked his character, as everyone got a free one. I think that was back in version 1.4 of ZZZ as well. But yeah, I think that wraps up my thoughts on the Novaflare reworks. But I also wanted to use this video to have an excuse to talk about potential future reworks, both ones that I think Reworks might do and ones that I would personally want to see, even if they never realistically are going to happen. So if you just wanted to see kind of like an analysis and everything on the Novaflare buffs that were already implemented, or reworks that were already implemented and everything, you can stop watching from here, as I'm just gonna kind of go into more of like a speculation type format for the rest of the video. So yeah, let's start with the characters I think are the most likely candidates for buffs. So I think the first is Ratio. Although my main problem with Ratio, in where I don't think he would be buffed, is that he was given for free. But I do think that there are ways that you could buff Ratio for him to be far more meta relevant than he is now, as he's fallen off pretty hard. His biggest issues right now are the randomness of his follow-up attacks and his lower damage ceiling. Rework could smooth this out by making its follow-up guaranteed while scaling their damage off the debuffs on an enemy. I was kind of thinking something similar to Archer, who was another free unit that they released with the Fate collab, where the more debuffs you had on an enemy, the more damage your follow-up attack would do. Something like 50% more damage with one debuff, 100% with two, 150% with three, like with Archer, who deals more damage with each shot that he's able to pull off. While 150% damage does sound like a lot, you do have to remember that ratio only gets one follow-up attack per turn. So the damage would still be a bit more balanced than something like Archer being able to fire off multiple shots in a row. But it would still be a nice change instead of having the randomness of its kit. And then I think that the ultimate could be adjusted as well so that enemies take more damage from follow-up attacks, or maybe have more crit damage, kind of like Aventurine's ult. But yeah, I do think that would make him a bit more synergistic with Topaz and Aventurine, his classic team, as they would kind of all be working together to debuff enemies while also dealing damage to a single enemy and everything. So it would just be another way to kind of build into that synergy. And it would also still work with this current signature light cone and everything. You wouldn't have to change that. But yeah, the next character I think could receive a buff is Argenti. He is kind of a niche pick right now, as a DPS at least, which was his intended role. He is still usable in Pure Fiction, but definitely could use a bit of a tweak. I think it would be interesting to see him reworked to be something like a dedicated support for the Herda, and focus more on generating energy for both himself and his teammates in that team. You do kind of have Anaxa as a dedicated the Herda support, but Anaxa does perform a little bit better as a main DPS on his own compared to being just a support for the Herda. But yeah, I think Aventurine shifting into that role would be a nice way to expand his kit for future characters as well. As you could make him maybe not fully dedicated to the Herda, but just kind of be more of an energy generation AoE sub DPS that works with the Herda, but could also work with other characters as well. And could even have synergy with Anaxa in that way. But yeah, I can't really speak too much on what I would change about Aventurine. On Argenti, just because I don't have Argenti, and I also don't have the Herda on my account, or Anaxa. I did not really pull for that entire archetype, so it's a bit hard for me to speculate on how exactly those changes would come about, but I do think that would be kind of an interesting way to go about changing them. For some characters that I think should get a rework, but probably won't, Seal and Dan Heng, Bybiter, both of these characters are mechanically solid. Their multipliers just kind of don't hold up nowadays. Scylla especially could use a benefit to some of her multipliers and everything. Even her E6 is a little bit on the weaker side compared to some of the modern characters in Star Rail at this point, with her being the first limited character. But you can still do really well with Scylla if you have really good investment on her, but the average player is not really able to use Scylla to do pretty much anything anymore, and I think that could be improved with a rework. And then I do think Dan Heng could also use some modifier increases and everything. I do think his kit is really interesting and everything, but I don't really see them changing Dan Heng and Bybiter with them coming out with a new form of Dan Heng in the Euphoria story next patch. So yeah, I don't really see them changing anything just because I feel like they would probably just keep coming out with more versions of Dan Heng. Eventually, you could just have a full team, I'd imagine, in the future. But Yeah, I don't really think that they need kit changes as much as they just kind of need multiplier changes to keep them up to speed. So I don't even think a rework is even entirely necessary. They could just have new relic sets that benefit them and future characters that are like them in the future, uh, rather than a direct kit buff. But I wouldn't be entirely opposed to seeing a direct kit buff to them, as they have fallen quite a bit from their release versions and everything. But yeah, for my never in a million years reworks, or the ones I think could never happen but I would really like to see, I think this is an interesting pick. I would actually like to see the 1.0 versions of the Trailblazer reworked, the physical and also the fire Trailblazer, both reworked. But yeah, whenever the Harmony MC came out, they became the first character that could enable Super Break to exist. And then whenever Few came out, I went back and looked at the Destruction Trailblazer, and they actually do have some break synergy, but it's not really that great. So I think turning them into a Super Break DPS, although one that's still weaker than the limited ones, but stronger than their current version, could be a nice way to kind of modernize the physical Trailblazer. As I know a lot of people really like the Trailblazer with the bat in the community, and that's kind of how Hoyo presents them a lot of the time in the game, as carrying around their bat. But I am pretty sure no one has used physical Trailblazer for pretty much anything since like version 1.5 maybe. Like, I have not seen anything with the physical Trailblazer in forever. I mean, maybe that's kind of pushing it. They were probably dropped off in some 2.x version, but yeah, the physical Trailblazer does have a kit that could benefit from something like Super Break already, but I think giving them something like Rappa's innate Super Break, because whenever you ult with Rappa, you don't actually need a Super Break enabler on your team. You can just have Super Break exist. I think that would be kind of neat for the physical Trailblazer to have. They don't give anyone else Super Break, they just have Super Break themselves whenever they hit enemies with their weakness broken, with their skill. And I think their ult 3 should also do that. I mean, their ult 2, because the Trailblazer has two forms of the ult. The second one is the one that is an AoE. Their first ult is single target, and I think it would be kind of cool if they had like an enhanced version of Super Break that only goes off whenever you actually break the enemy's toughness bar. Something like a hyper break damage, so they have like a really big burst with their ult 1 if you happen to break the enemy's toughness bar with that, or their exo toughness bar, for some fugue synergy. But yeah, I just think it would be kind of a fun way to rework their kit, and then also maybe giving them some break effect synergy with some of their Ascension traces or some energy generation and everything to kind of modernize their kit a bit. I do think that they probably should still be weaker than most of the limited hyper or super break carries in the game, like Firefly, Bootil, and Rappa, but it would be nice to have kind of a good free-to-play accessible option outside of like Zweiyi/Himiko. As Zweiyi's kind of fallen off quite a bit, Himiko is still somewhat usable in Super Break, just because her kit is one of the better designed ones in Star Rail, even for being a 1.0 character. Like, I remember back in 1.0, people did not really like Himiko, but I think that she is probably one of the best aged characters in the game, and I do want to make a video talking about that. I've been trying to script that out forever, but haven't really been able to word it that well. But I might do something like that soon. But yeah, that's it for physical. For fire, Preservation Trailblazer, I think that they could be modernized to become a stronger, more defensive option. I do think it would be really nice to touch up Preservation Trailblazer, just because the really big lack of preservation characters in the game. You have Preservation Trailblazer, March 7th, Aventurine, Japard, and then you're going to have the new Dan Heng form. And that's it on Preservation. Or no, Fushuan as well. Forgot about her. But yeah, that's it for preservation. You've got 6 characters compared to all of the other paths having a lot more than 6. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but yeah. I do think it would be kind of fun to go back and modernize them just because the fact that there's so few preservation characters, and most of the preservation characters aren't even usable outside of like Venturine, kind of Fushuan, and then the new Dan Heng will be usable as he's releasing next patch and everything. So yeah, I think that an interesting change would be to scale their damage and shields off of defense rather than have the attack scaling that they have for a lot of their damage. I think their taunt could use more reliable application. And I think an interesting change would be to kind of make their taunt pull from their effect resist rather than their effect hit rate. As I think that having your preservation characters scale off of like defense and effect resist, and then have characters in the abundance path, or your healer characters scale off of HP and or HP and speed, is kind of like an interesting way to keep their kits a bit different when relic farming and everything. And I think something like having their taunt make it where a character that gets hit by an enemy that is taunted on the Trailblazer, so they're not supposed to get hit because the enemy is supposed to hit the Trailblazer, but if it's like an AoE hit or whatever, I think that they could take reduced damage. So it'd be both a way to focus the damage on the preservation Trailblazer and also still be able to defend your allies as well, as their current shield is definitely not enough to be able to do that. And I think their ultimate could have some defense scaling and everything. I wouldn't imagine it doing a lot of damage or anything still, but having proper defense scaling and everything would be able to improve the damage quite a bit in a way. The Preservation Trailblazer is used occasionally in Acheron teams, but it's really rare and really bad compared to most of the other options, so they are very rarely used. I do think that they have had more use than the Destruction Trailblazer, maybe not cumulatively, but just over time at this point. But yeah, I think those could just be some fun ways to change up the Trailblazer and everything. I do think it would be nice to have the rules are made to be broken voice line able to be heard in modern HSR, especially on a break character with a physical Trailblazer rework. But yeah, I think looking at all the examples, it's clear that character rebalancing is something that could be a fun and interesting direction for Star Rail to go in the future and have discussions about, just because a lot of the discussions right now in the community are focused around power creep and doom posting and all the new characters being stronger than all the old characters and all this stuff. Bunch of just general negativity and everything, which I do think is... It does have a place, because it is an issue with the game and everything, but yeah, just a way to have different types of conversation in the community without going into that kind of a thing through character buffs, I think would be way more fun. And I would like to know what other types of character buffs people would like to see and everything, or other ways of implementing character buffs and everything that could be possible for Reworks to do, realistic or even unrealistically and everything. But yeah, it's kind of my thoughts on everything. Kind of rambly towards the end. I did have a script written out for this video. I did go quite off script though, because I sound very monotone when reading scripts, so I try to go off script most of the time, but keep it in front of me so that way I don't get too lost in what I'm saying. But yeah, hopefully this video isn't super long because of that or anything, but yeah, just wanted to have some sort of video out on HSR just because it's been a while since I uploaded to YouTube and everything, because I've been working on this and then I have a bunch of IRL stuff going on that have made it a little bit harder to keep my upload schedule that I said I was going to start doing, but I am trying to get everything stabilized and then going back to it and everything. I will be doing new ZZZ in-game clear upload later this week, so can look forward to that Friday and everything when I normally upload them. But yeah, that's going to be it for now. Guess I'll see everyone in the next one.